Hey everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in Billings, Montana. Thanks for joining in. Today I'm going to tie for you a soft hackle March brown. Let's talk a little bit about March browns. March browns, entomologists divide mayflies into 4 basic groups based on their anatomical adaptations that allow them to live where they live. March browns live in the very fastest water. Wherever you have white water over rocks, that's where the March browns live. They are a part of what's called the clinger group. They're very distinctive. They're a fairly large fly. Our March browns are size 12s and 14s. They're actually the largest mayfly to hatch in our early season. As the name implies, March, in our elevation with our water temperatures, maybe end of March, beginning of April. But these nymphs live in the very fastest water, and the way that they're designed, I should say, they're very flattened from top to bottom. Their head is kind of shovel-shaped. Their legs are very, very strong, sticking straight out from their bodies. They have 3 very stiff tails. And their gills on their abdomen actually come together underneath and form a suction cup. So it really aids these bugs in staying on this very, very fast water and these rocks. In fact, it's almost impossible to pick one of these off the rocks without tearing them apart. So most of the time they're unavailable to trout because they simply can't get them off the rocks. Now when it's time to hatch, the March brown nymphs will actually migrate to the slightly softer water to the sides or downstream. They're one of the few mayflies that actually start hatching from the bottom. So as they're coming up towards the top, their wings are actually starting to unfold. And that's where a soft hackle fly really comes in handy for a March brown, because it imitates so well the way they emerge. And it's at this time that they're most available to trout. Of course, we can get some excellent dry fly fishing for March browns as well. But the soft hackle is really the way to go. And I'm going to tie one here with a bead in it as well. The bead gives it a little bit extra weight, allows it to get down a little bit faster. This fly has a CDC collar, which I'm going to tie. You could also use plain soft hackle, like partridge on this. The key with the soft hackle is the movement of the collar, the hackle. The thing that fish look for is it alive? And a soft hackle is a very lively fly. You can fish these as a dropper behind a nymph. You can fish these as a dropper behind a dry fly. You can fish these in pairs. They're effective from the bottom all the way to the top of the water. All right, so let's get to the tying here. I'm just using, this is a Firehole model 419. This is a size 14. I like this hook because it's a 2x gap, also a light wire. The bead is a natural brass colored 3/32 bead, and I'm just using 10/0 Veevus thread. Now we want to make sure we leave room behind the eye of the fly to tie in our soft hackle, and the bead width itself gives us a pretty good idea of how much room we need to leave up front. I'm going to start my thread just slightly behind the bead and build a little bit of a thread bump here. Just enough to help place that bead where we want it, and then just a little bit of zap a gap, right on that thread bump. Just a touch here. Whoa, that's too much. All right. Place just a little bit on there. Slide that bead up on it. Give that a second to set. Now for the tail, I'm going to be using some pheasant tail feather, and I'm going to divide it using the thread loop method. If you're going to do that, make sure you cut off a few inches of thread before you start tying your fly. I do that, keep it in my hackle pliers so that I don't lose it. I'm just going to take 3 hurls here. Now, the nymphs themselves have 3 tails. Whether this is actually critical on what you tie, of course, is doubtful. But we'll try to make this as close to real as I can. And you could use any soft hackle material, mallard flank, hen hackle, anything you wanted to. So we'll strip those off. All right, so I have 3 here. The tails are actually about body length. I'll measure that and tie them in. Want to get these up on top of the hook shank. Get them down securely. Move our thread back. Now to split these, I'm simply going to use my thumb here to fan these out a little bit. Separate them. And then with my loop of thread, wrap this around the hook shank itself. Bring it up and capture the middle fiber temporarily. Get that attached, and then I can manipulate that. Tie it down so that I get a really nice spread tail. And then tie that down up to the bead. So that's a simple method of splitting a triple tail like that. If you forget to take the thread off before you start to tie, really any thread will work regardless of the color. It's all going to be covered anyway. Okay, I'm going to have a little bit of ribbing here over my Biot, so I'm going to use some extra small copper wire. And tie this in on the far side. I'm going to wrap this in a conventional manner. Capture this right behind the bead. Wrap it down, keep this body nice and smooth, because what comes next is the Biot. I like to use a Biot body. Now, because the Biot has width, my thread is actually about 1 thread wrap ahead of where the tails are tied in. I'm simply going to take, this is actually by Wapsi. This is a March Brown turkey Biot. I really like the coloration on it. It gives a nice segmentation. March Browns are a heavily ribbed fly. The segmentation shows up very well on the nymphs. So I'm going to tie this in so that the heavy edge, the hard edge, is facing to the rear of the fly. Capture the tip on my side of the hook with a flat thread. And then wrap forward over it again. Be aware of the thread body underneath. The body itself will assume this taper when we tie it down. Now, when I use a Biot, I usually use a little bit of very thin head cement on the thread wraps before I wrap it. And then with the wire wrap over the top, it helps to reinforce it. So when you start to wrap your Biot, you want to make sure that it doesn't twist, because we're at the tip, the finest part, so I like to bring it out away from me and straight away because we're actually folding it over itself. So as we start to wrap, you can see how that hard edge stands up and gives a nice ribbing effect. If I were to tie it in the other way and wrap it, it could make a nice smooth body. We'll wrap it right up to the bead. I get it right tight behind the bead here. Trim that close, and then we'll rivet with the copper wire. Try to rivet right in between those wraps of Biot. I think it adds a little flash to it, a little bit of weight, but primarily a little bit of durability. When you break off wire, always make sure that your thread and your wire are 100 degrees away from each other. Your thread forms the anchor. Pull it straight towards you. All it should take is a couple of twists and your wire is off. Now just to finish that up, right behind the bead, I'm going to use a little bit of SLF dubbing, the Whitlock Dubbing. This happens to be squirrel thorax. There's a lot of different dubbings you can use, but just to give it, again, a little substance, maybe a little bit of movement. It doesn't take very much at all. But this fox squirrel dubbing does have the guard hairs in it, and I like the effect. Dub it on there nice and tight. Now you can actually help hide your whip finish by leaving just a little bit of dubbing on the thread before you whip finish. You can't leave much on there, but just a little bit, and that helps to hide your whip finish. All right, so at this point we disconnect the thread and we restart it right behind the eye of the hook. Bring it to the front of the bead. All right, I'm going to make a dubbing loop here, and I'm going to be using some of this premium CDC that Wapsi sells. It's an excellent feather. Looks like this. You don't get many of these in a boxed package. I'm going to use a pair of them. I'm going to pair them front to back, tip to tip, like so, with the stems parallel, and simply get these fibers and tease them out a little bit. Dubbing loop, take 2 wraps of thread directly over where you made the loop. I like to close the top of that loop off by making 2 clockwise wraps of thread around the loop, and then we bring our thread forward. I'm going to secure this with a half hitch while I make my dubbing loop. Now this is a new tool that we have recently gotten in, and I'm going to be showcasing it much more in the future. This is a clip, but it's so unlike the plastic clips that we've had before that it's just amazing. Very good strength to it. It's all steel, all metal, plus you have the window here so you can see how much material you've clipped in, the length of it. It also has some markings on the side so you can repeat the length of material that you put in your dubbing loop. It's also beveled and shaped like this so you can slide this into a patch of fur, isolate a strip, cut it out. It's a wonderful tool. I'll be using it a lot more here as we go along. So I have these 2 CDC feathers stacked on top of each other, and I've preened the herl out from the quill. And we're not going to need a lot here. We don't have a very big collar. clip about that much, and then I'm going to clip this away from the quill itself. Like so. Make sure that our loop is open. And slide this in up as close as we can to the hook shank. Just like that. This tool makes it so easy, it's unbelievable. I think one of the biggest errors that people make on soft hackles is they make the collar too dense. It should be sparse. It should move in the water. If you make this material too heavy, you actually inhibit its ability to move in the water. So I'm simply wrapping this, kind of stroking this back. CDC also has tremendous temerity for air bubbles. It likes to collect them, which gives this fly even more life. Tie this off, a couple of wraps, and we'll dispose of that loop. Then if you like, before you finish the fly up, you can stroke these hackles back a little bit, put a couple of turns of thread right behind the eye, come back, thread wraps right next to each other, kind of pin that hackle back, like so. And then a nice tight whip finish here. So with the exception of having to take the thread off and remount it once, it's a very, very simple fly to tie, extremely effective. Soft hackles used to be a very, very popular fly. They've kind of fallen out of favor. They're now coming back again. But if you're not fishing soft hackles, you're missing out on a really, really good bet for any species, any type of insect at all. Again, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions or any comments, please don't hesitate to let us know. And we'll see you next time.